Okay, so first of all, it's a slight change to what's written in the program. I am not Maria Goretti Anna, unfortunately. But I do want to thank Sean for allowing us to speak as IDPC here, but also for allowing us to have this session that looks at the international drug policy procedures. So what I'm going to do is build a bit on what Natalie's already presented and talk a little bit more about UNGAS, but also focus on what happens next and what comes next at the international level, and more importantly, how you can all engage, as has been said, as this first generation of drug policy reformers on the continent. So firstly, just a quick word about IDPC, the International Drug Policy Consortium. We are a global network of NGOs all around the world, 170 NGOs, including TB HIV care, including ARASA, including pills. And we come together as a network to promote better drug policies that are based on human rights, on harm reduction, on civil society engagement. And part of what IDPC tries to do is to try and demystify what is happening at the international level, and to try and link these UN processes, but sometimes they seem like they're a million miles away from reality. In fact, no, sometimes they are a million miles away from reality. But we try to link them with what is happening on the ground and the great work that's being done in countries all around the world. So as Natalie already said, the UNGAS is the General Assembly Special Session. It was a big, important moment for us in the drugs field because these UNGASs don't happen very often. As you can see from the bottom here, you can have a special session on any topic: HIV, children, migration, any topic at all. It's just an issue that the member states agree that they want to have an urgent conversation about. Now, this conversation on drugs was actually meant to take place in 2019, and I'll explain why in a minute. But the governments of Guatemala, Mexico, and Colombia came together and said, we have to have this conversation sooner. We cannot wait. This is too urgent. And they're three of the countries that have arguably been hit hardest by this rubbish war on drugs. So the last time we had an UNGAS on drugs was 1998. So you can see that these are quite few and far between. And this is the slogan that they had for that meeting in 1998, a drug-free world, we can do it. And the target was that by 2008, 10 years' time, the world would be drug-free. So I don't need to tell you that's not quite happened. So as Natalie was mentioning, I'm going to just very quickly go through some of the results that we got from the UNGAS. It was a mixed result. I think that's probably the politest way to put it. We got some good things, and there were some things we didn't get. There's quite a few things we didn't get. But that's the nature of this process. The government statements, some of the government statements at the UNGAS were very powerful. 61 governments stood up and opposed the death penalty for drug offences. 18 governments stood up and said, we have got to end the war on drugs. 45 governments stood up and promoted harm reduction. That may not seem like a huge number, but that's the most it's ever been. Okay? This is all about momentum and progress. The UN agencies had their strongest contribution that we've ever had. UN Women, UNDP, UNAIDS, the World Health Organization, the Office on Human Rights, all these different UN agencies all made submissions to the UNGAS, and most of them talked about harm reduction, decriminalization, the kind of support don't punish kind of idea, and the fact that we need to end the war on drugs. Civil society, as Natalie said, had a great presence. We had speakers on the panels. We had a strong, loud presence at this meeting. We could not be ignored. And then there was the document, which again, Natalie's already shown you the cover of the document. Again, if it was just up to us, it would have looked very different, but it's not just up to us. These things are agreed by consensus, which means that every government in that room has got to agree to this language. If one government decides they don't like the word harm reduction, the word harm reduction doesn't go in. And that's what happened. But we did get the best document we've had on drugs in a long time. Arguably the best document to date. The structure is the best it's ever been. We have a whole chapter on drugs and health, a whole chapter on access to medicines, a whole chapter on alternative development, a whole chapter on human rights and gender. We've never had this before. It was big, big progress. And as I say, the biggest win of it really was the momentum. Things move painfully slowly at the United Nations level, painfully slowly. But they are moving in a good direction. We just have to accept that things aren't going to happen overnight. Now, as I said, there's also a lot of things we didn't get. There's a lot of things that we wish hadn't happened. Some other government statements were, well, almost farcical. 24 governments promoted the war on drugs. 28 governments said that we need to push for a drug-free world. 2 governments said that their country is drug-free, which did make us all kind of giggle because we know it's complete nonsense. As has been mentioned, there was very low African engagement at the UNGAS, unfortunately. Part of this is because most of those negotiations take place in Vienna, in Austria, because that's where the United Nations headquarters that deals with drugs is based. Only a handful of African governments actually have diplomatic staff in Vienna. I think it's 11 or 12. So those governments there that have staff in Vienna are representing the entire continent of Africa. South Africa is one of them. And South Africa has a really important role to play here, and it does have a voice in Vienna, and it does speak on behalf of a lot of other countries without their permission. But the role of South Africa is really important, partly because they're part of this Africa group that exists in Vienna, but also because of this BRICS alliance, or whatever you call it. You know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS alliance. Not the most progressive countries when it comes to drug policy, unfortunately. The BRICS alliance are not our friends when we're talking about reform. But South Africa is centrally placed in these discussions. The document completely fails to acknowledge that the war on drugs hasn't worked. It just doesn't talk about it. It's like buries its head in the sand. It again talks about a society free of drug abuse. It doesn't mention the death penalty because some countries didn't want to talk about that. It doesn't say harm reduction, although it does talk about harm reduction services, but it doesn't use the words harm reduction, and it doesn't talk about legal regulation. So we didn't get everything we wanted. We never were going to get everything we wanted. That's never going to happen. But we did get a lot. So just quickly on why is this important? I mean, these agreements that are made at the international level, they have a direct impact on the policies and the laws in every country. And that's the same for Africa as it is in Asia, as it is in Europe, as it is in Latin America, as it is anywhere. These help to shape the narrative. Most drug laws some of them are almost copy and paste from the UN conventions. So these discussions do have a lot of relevance for the national level. And like I say, Africa's not been very engaged. When you go to the United Nations and you listen to what's being said on behalf of Africa by these handful of countries, you would never know that this conversation is happening here in Cape Town. You would never know, as Olga presented earlier, you'd never know that 5 countries have harm reduction services, needle and syringe programs and OST. It doesn't get talked about in Africa. It doesn't get talked about in the United Nations. It doesn't get represented. And it is really important that we use this as an opportunity to tell the world what is happening on this continent. Because good things are happening, and we're hearing about them this week. So I'm going to quickly talk about what happens next, because the UNGAS was last year. What comes next? We're now in this phase that they call UNGAS implementation. And they're working, some of the progressive governments in Vienna are working really hard to make sure that the UNGAS gets embedded, that it doesn't just get dismissed and forgotten. In many ways, when we think about the UNGAS, one of the markers of success is the fact that there's some governments, like Russia, they want to forget it ever happened. They're desperate to forget it ever happened. They want to just go back to the previous agreement in 2009. They don't want to talk about the UNGAS anymore. And we should take that as a huge measure of success, because it means we got a lot of progress, and they're not happy about it. So there's now these follow-up meetings in Vienna. They're taking place where governments are going to come back together, and they're going to talk about what they've been doing since the UNGAS, what has changed, what services they're putting in place, things like this. But crucially, there's an opportunity here for civil society to also speak and to give your perspective about what's been happening since the UNGAS. These meetings take place in September, October, and November. There's 8 meetings in total. The deadline, if you want to speak, is next Sunday. I think that's the 6th of August. So that's the deadline to speak if you want to speak at this meeting. Either if you can get to Austria, that's great, but if you can't, you can present by video intervention, okay? If anyone here wants to do that, please come and see me afterwards and I can let you know how to apply. Because I think it is really important that we hear more from the continent, and we hear more from South Africa, and we hear more from Southern Africa, and we hear more about what's happening in these places. And all those meetings, if you're not there, you can find out exactly what got said. IDPC has a website called CND Blog, and we go to these meetings so that you don't have to, because they're not always the most interesting things in the world. And we blog everything that gets said. So you can go on that website and you can find out what did South Africa say, what did Zimbabwe say, what did Tanzania say. You can find that out without having to travel all the way to Austria. It's a beautiful place, by the way, if you do get to go. So the next big moment, let's say, for drug policy in the United Nations is in 2019. And we know that something is going to happen in 2019. The reason for that is we currently have a political declaration on drugs that every government has signed up to, and that was signed up to in 2009, and it's a 10-year declaration. So by 2019, that document expires. And by 2019, we're meant to have eliminated or significantly reduced drug use, drug trafficking, drug demand, drug production. Again, if that happens by 2019, I don't know what the next year looks like, because we're nowhere near it, and nor should we be. So we know that something has to happen in 2019, because this document expires. And the thing that they've agreed is they're going to have a high-level meeting in Vienna in March 2019. So this is what we know. There's a lot that we don't know. And a lot of it we don't know because the countries can't even agree at the moment. You know, a lot of this we don't know because there hasn't been a decision made. What does this meeting look like? What's the structure? How do they prepare for it? And what is the outcome? Do they do a new political declaration? There are some governments, I don't know where South Africa stands on this, but there are some governments that just want to extend the previous political declaration for another 10 years, hell, 20, 30, 50 years, who knows? And for me, personally, that would be an absolute disaster, because then all the good work we did for the young gas is lost, because we go back to 2009 and we just carry on doing what we know hasn't worked. We know it doesn't work. So why would you just extend it for 10 years and hope that it's going to work by 2029? Of course it's not. We also don't know anything about what role civil society will play, but through the Civil Society Task Force and through networks like IDPC, we'll be pushing very hard for us to have a strong role. So what can we ask for? Well, I mean, we could ask for the heavens, you know, but realistically, what could we hope to achieve? We should be asking for a proper, honest evaluation of the last 10 years. Ideally, even an independent one. What didn't work and why didn't it work and what needs to change? Okay? Obviously, there's some governments are not going to want to do that because governments aren't that keen on admitting they got it wrong, especially if they've no intention of changing what they do. We need to build upon the young gas, all those wins that I talked about earlier, the UN agency contributions, the civil society contributions, the language that we got. We need to build on all of that. We need to maintain this better structure where there's a whole section on development and a whole section on human rights. We need to always push for harm reduction. We need to never stop pushing for harm reduction. Decriminalization, the end of the death penalty. It's insane that we still can't even get the end of the death penalty acknowledged by these governments. But we have to keep pushing. That's our role. That's our job. So just the last slide for me is just some ideas about how to engage. You can attend this meeting. IDPC, as I say, one of our roles is to try and link organizations on the ground, whether you're members or not. We try to link organizations on the ground with these processes. So if you have any queries, then the next slide will have my email on. Just let me know. We can try and help you engage in this process if you want to. But you can attend these meetings, you can participate remotely. It's a great opportunity to meet with your government and to have discussions with your government. Natalie gave some great examples of when this has happened. And if you do it really well, you get to ask the question and then answer it yourself. Perfect. You can organize side events. You can present your reports. You can share your reports and your documents and your experience. This is a very rare opportunity to have an audience of governments from all around the world. And they do attend these side events. They do want to hear what's going on. And especially from Africa, because as I said, they don't hear enough about what's happening in this part of the world. You can follow the debate, as I said, the CND blog, the IDPC website, there's lots of other resources as well. Follow the debate even if you can't physically travel to Austria. And then the last thing, I'm contractually obliged to mention our campaign. Support Don't Punish is a campaign that anyone can join, anyone can be a part of. Please visit the website and be part of this. Again, it's part of this movement that is trying to push things forward and trying to get this message across that, at the very least, we've got to stop treating this problem as a criminal problem.